So, could you bear to watch it? We're going to be recapping last night's first and likely last debate between VP Harris and former President Trump. But unlike Kamala, we will not be dismissing the seriousness of the day. It is September 11th. 23 years after a solemn, tragic day we certainly all remember, but equally certain we're never given an accurate narrative. I'm Christy Lee, bringing you the counter narrative.
Side.
Now, coming up, we're going to be diving into the significance of today, 9/11, more than 20 years after having to watch in horror as fellow Americans had to leap from the tallest buildings in New York to escape the heat structures that were about to come crashing down. Doug Jeffries, author of American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation, is on standby with analysis. But first, going to of course, quickly recap last night's debate between presidential contenders, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. My first impression was that Kamala seemed very nervous, but once it was clear to most watching that this was a 3-on-1 debate, she had the clear support of the ABC moderators, the tone shifted. Here's what RFK Jr., who recently suspended his campaign to team up with Trump, had to say about that. Watch.
Fortunately, we had moderators who are clearly biased, who are constantly fact-checking Donald Trump. None of these kind of whoppers that the vice president was saying, and none of her failure to really explain that, answer that first question, that very, very critical first question. They simply sat there on the sidelines and allowed that to pass.
That struck me too. The very first question she is asked about, do you think people are better off than 4 years ago? Donald Trump's question, he asks people, are you better off now under a Biden-Harris administration? She completely sidestepped that, did not answer it, and just went into a story about how she's from a middle-class family, just completely spin zone. And of course, there was no challenge. There was no pushback on her. Now, while Trump had to debate with her and the moderators getting phony fact checks, Kamala, she received no pushback. And there are several examples. Take the gun debate. Harris is on record threatening the Second Amendment with commitments to implement gun buyback programs or ban assault rifles. Now suddenly she and her running mate are proud gun owners? Since when? Watch.
And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff. As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand.
What would you do about the millions of, specifically, assault weapons that are already in circulation? What do you do about those?
Well, there are approximately 5 million, to your point, Craig. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
Gun buyback program. So in other words, she does want to take your guns, and yet she is allowed to stand there, rather, at her mini podium. Did you notice that she had a smaller podium to make her look as large of a presence as Trump? She gets to stand there and accuse him of lying. Well, she's lying. I mean, this is what they do. She is literally on that video in another interview saying that we have to have a mandatory buyback program. But of course, no challenge from her teammate moderators. Not the way they challenged Trump on his exposing Kamala for supporting no limits on abortion. Watch.
I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here.
And of course, it wasn't a lie. And Lindsay Davis should have kept her mouth shut because Trump is right. As Sarah Carter posted on X, Trump is right about the radical abortion laws. In Minnesota, Walz removed the requirement to save babies still alive after abortions. Here's more evidence from National Review. House Democrats almost unanimously oppose bill to protect babies born alive after abortion. This is sick. The moderator has never made Kamala admit her radical view on abortion, that there should be no limits on abortion right on up to full term. She never had to answer that question, to admit that she thinks abortion, there should be no limit right on up until the 9th month. And in some cases, I mean, if they're not going to save the baby, if it is born alive after term, then yes, it's abortion after term. I do feel, unfortunately, that there were several instances where Trump took the bait. He fell into the planned traps that were set. Instead of focusing on the verifiable violence and harm of an influx of illegal aliens unvetted, Trump touted citizen reports of pets being eaten by Haitians in Springfield. But the bottom line is these so-called journalists are all too eager to take press releases from officials, then speak to these community residents for themselves. Do a little bit of, boots on the ground that you would expect for journalists that are supposed to serve their public to do. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, did do a much better job at exposing the fake news. Watch him take down CNN's Caitlin Collins.
I would say is he brought up this misleading false claim that you yourself have talked about in recent days about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, abducting people's pets and eating them, which officials there have said is not true. You yourself acknowledged it may be false on Twitter. You still told people to keep spreading it. But Trump just amplified it to tens of millions of people who were watching. Why push something that's not true?
Well, first of all, city officials have not said it's not true. They've said they don't have all the evidence.
They said they have no evidence.
We've heard from a number of constituents on the ground, Caitlin, who both firsthand and secondhand reports saying this stuff is happening. So they very clearly, meaning the people on the ground dealing with this, think that it is happening. And I think that it's important for journalists to actually get on the ground and uncover this stuff for themselves when you have a lot of people saying, my pets are being abducted, or geese at the city pond are being abducted and slaughtered right in front of us. This is crazy stuff. And again, whether those exact rumors turn out to be mostly true, somewhat true, whatever the case may be, Caitlin, this town has been ravaged by 20,000 migrants coming in. Healthcare costs are up. Housing costs are up. Communicable diseases like HIV and TB have skyrocketed in this small Ohio town. This is what Kamala Harris's border policies have done. And I think it's interesting, Caitlin, that the media didn't care about the carnage wrought by these policies until we turned it into a meme about cats. And that speaks to the media's failure to care about what's going on in these communities. If we have to meme about it to get the media to care, we're going to keep on doing it because the media should care about what's going on.
I saw you say
See, I mean, that's how it's done. So I feel like J.D. Vance handled that better than Trump did, quite frankly. I would have liked to see more moments where Trump can shine. His humor and his zingers, like where he told Biden he didn't even know if Biden knew what he had said in that last debate. Here's one of my favorite moments from last night. Watch.
Police. In Minnesota, she went out. Wait a minute. I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
That is why she did not want the mute button, so that she could be like, I'm speaking right now, like she did in the vice presidential debate with Pence. And so it was so funny. And those moments show just the humanity of the situation and expose her rehearsed answers compared to his off the cuff mocking of the ridiculousness. And predictably, the monitors banged on the tire drum of January 6th, pressing him on if he had any regrets about that day. Yet it has only been a couple of short months since the attempt on Donald Trump's life, and no questions about the attempted assassination of a former president that is on stage. Are you kidding me? No question for Kamala on if she had any regrets about her rhetoric that likely led to us nearly seeing his head blown off. Seriously? You think for 1 second that if the tables were turned, that the whole debate wouldn't have been about the attempt on Kamala's life? Instead, they allowed her to lie unchecked again about even where she was on January 6th. So, why was the debate so biased, so coordinated in Kamala's favor? Well, from the National Pulse, debate hosting ABC News boss is 30-year besties with Kamala, mega donor to Dems. The New York Times confirmed this last month. Perhaps this is also why MRC's Newsbusters reported that reporting on Kamala has been 100% favorable from ABC News. Incredible. Even when she says disgusting things like this.
Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
Kamala and her leftist Trump derangement syndrome buddies are notorious for minimizing 9/11. But to say that the day before the anniversary is truly unbelievable. We'll be honoring the day by talking the truth about 9/11 next with author Donald Jeffries. But first, let's hear from our sponsors that make this show possible.
Looking to give your wardrobe an upgrade? Well, look no further. Here at God Country & Kin, we've got you covered from head to toe, from shoulder to shoulder, and everything in between. Introducing our brand new Patriotic Collection, designed to display your patriotic spirit with a stylish look that's sure to turn heads. And the best part is, you don't have to break the bank to be your best you. Why wait? Visit us online or in-store today and elevate your style with God Country & Kin. God Country & Kin, where patriotism meets style. Shop now. Visit the Patriot TV store and look for the God Country Kin banner to find the perfect outfit, shirt, accessory, or maybe a great hat. You can totally see yourself rocking this hat. I know you can. And check out all the great stuff we've got to show your patriotism at patriot.tv.store. Click that link above that says store and join me there at the Patriot TV store.
Now, after frequently minimizing 9/11, Chameleon will commemorate the anniversary today, along with Trump, with multiple events, according to NPR. But even after more than 2 decades, the biggest slap in the face to victims are the many unanswered questions that remain about 9/11/2001. So here to discuss is Donald Jeffries. He's an author of American Memory Hole: How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. Jeffries explores the Kennedy family in general and finds that the establishment, especially the left, continues to treat them unfairly. The events of September 11th, 2001 and the Oklahoma City bombing are investigated in depth as never before. So Donald, thank you so much for joining me on this very important day. I really appreciate the time you took to spend with me, because you are sought after on this subject. But before we dive in, I wanted to ask you if you did have a chance to watch the Harris-Trump debate, because that is also big news, just being the day after, and see if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually did watch it a little bit. I don't know why. I don't know why I watch these things. I knew it was pretty predictable. I mean, Trump was Trump. You know, he's what you get, and it was, as you noted, obviously very one-sided. I mean, the way they questioned her as they questioned him, I can't believe that these journalists actually believe that anyone thinks they're unbiased, but apparently some people do. But if you're watching it, it's clearly, I mean, they were lobbing her softballs constantly. They didn't press her at all on anything, and Trump was constantly under attack. And it's familiar. Anybody who's watched this play out since Trump entered politics, it's the same thing all the time.
Well, I mean, they're obviously coming from this arrogant elitist attitude that it's the responsibility to tell the American people what to think, be arbiters of truth, as opposed to serve the public. And it would have been a better service to the public to treat this debate fairly. You would almost have expected them to overcompensate, because they were going into this debate with the expectation that they were going to be biased. There was already a conflict of interest reported by the New York Times that the boss essentially is besties with Kamala and a big donor. So you would think that they would have almost wanted to overcompensate. But right out of the gate, the very first question they ask her about, what do you think people would say about if their lives are better 4 years later? She never answered. She just went into a rehearsed answer. It's truly unbelievable. And these are from the people that are constantly saying we have to protect people against disinformation. And that's part of the title of your book. But they allow disinformation to perpetrate only on the one side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hilarious that they use this term disinformation and misinformation against people like us who are attempting to do a job that they won't do. And J.D. Vance, who I think is, it could have debated Kamala Harris much better. He would have, because he's very articulate and he's very strong and he's not negative. But as he noted, he told that Caitlin Collins, a typical so-called professional journalist who would be fired if she attempted to investigate anything, why don't you go investigate these things? Why don't you go talk to these people that, because as you know, they were saying, oh, that's the city manager says that's not happening, as if the city manager is, someone we should necessarily believe. Just go talk to the people. I've seen interviews. The woman elderly woman that got up before the board and was talking about, the terrible things that were going on in her yard and, shouting at her in a foreign language and camping out on mattresses in her yard. It's like, what? It shouldn't be tolerated. But that's I think that it amazes me. Again, I've never been a Republican. I'm an independent. I started out as a very left-wing Democrat. When I was a teenager, I was a member of the ACLU, a card-carrying member. And I don't understand what has happened to the left, but I'm much more comfortable, obviously, talking to conservative people now, trying to conserve something of this country. But something like that, it's just incomprehensible to me when you know the government is facilitating this, bringing people in, whether or not they're eating dogs or cats or whatever. That's kind of a, maybe a sensational thing, but you have people claiming they are. So it's a question that J.D. Vance was saying, why are they there? And why aren't you going and investigating it firsthand? Because they won't do that. And as I pointed out, Christy, many times, this is my 10th book. I couldn't write the books I write if we had a free press. Because first of all, my history books, this is the third volume of hidden history that I've written. If the court historians, and that's what I call them because they're the gatekeepers of the past, if they had done their job and told the truth about these things, I wouldn't have anything to write about. What could I'm trying to expose things that happen that most people don't know about, have been covered up. But if they told the truth about these things, then I'd have to think of something else. I have to write something else, I guess. But so that Caitlin Collins exemplified that, and certainly the two moderators at ABC, they exemplified the kind of so-called journalists we have. I mean, keep in mind these people, especially my friends in the JFK assassination research community, who unfortunately almost all support Kamala Harris, it seems. They need to keep in mind that that these moderators believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK. And for Kamala Harris, I wrote an article about her a few years ago in American Free Press, and Paul Schrade, who was one of the guys that was shot in the Ambassador Hotel, just died a few years ago at 98. He was on my podcast too. He was one of the victims in the RFK assassination. He was so impressed with it, he contacted me, but people don't know how bad she was as a DA. She actually issued a statement at that time where she said, it doesn't matter. I don't care if there was a second gunman in the RFK assassination. So what kind of a district attorney would say something like, you don't care if there was a second gunman? First of all, they got away with murder, and that changes the whole scenario there. But that's what you're dealing with her. And so I think that exemplifies Kamala Harris in her career.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's really sad because 20 years ago now, man, I'm old. when I was at a very liberal university, I went to a very liberal university, and even at a very liberal university to major in broadcast journalism, we were warned and told repeatedly that you're going to get these press releases, you're going to get them from the government, you're going to get them from local police agencies. Just never take them at face value, do some digging. And that stuck with me because they taught us that the tenet of journalism was to serve the public and hear from the publics. They said you always want to favor talking to real people and people in the community as opposed to officials. Officials are always easy to get on cam, do the extra work, make sure that you can try and find someone to talk to you. That's all gone completely out the window. All of the networks are just parroting government press releases and parroting government numbers. I mean, when there was the moment in the debate about the fact checking from the moderators are like, sir, crime has gone down. It's like, no, you didn't take the extra step to like look into this a little bit further. You're literally parroting the FBI lines without digging a little bit deeper, knowing that because they changed how they report crime, that many of the worst cities reported no crime. So of course it's going to look as if it went down. So this is just what's so frustrating, because one of the biggest tenets of journalism is to hold those in power accountable. And time again, they fail us. This Harris Biden administration is who is currently in power, and it's always softballs with them, and still sticking it to the president who hasn't even been in there for nearly 4 years. It's absolutely sickening. But again, that's tangential, and perhaps we can do a whole other show on the state of journalism in the press. But I do want to try and focus on 9/11 as much as we can today, particularly because there was that moment in the debate where she said that Trump, and I believe she was referring to January 6th, was the biggest assault on democracy and assault on America since the Civil War. Yeah. And she said it the day before today, 9/11. Yeah, right. I mean, what was that like to hear?
Well, she's probably still excited, I guess, now that Dick Cheney, who certainly was at the center of 9/11, is endorsing her, as Trump pointed out too. So is Vladimir Putin, who she continues to try to claim that Trump is his puppet or something. It's an odd thing for him to do to endorse his opponent. But yeah, I think 9/11 is again. I go back to the JFK assassination. That's where that's my wheelhouse. I became interested in that, when I was a teenager. I worked for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry. He was the most famous critic of the Warren Report, wrote Rush to Judgment, and that's where I started going down these rabbit holes. And when 9/11 came along, I think that's kind of the millennials' version of the JFK assassination. It's their JFK assassination, but writ large, because it had a much bigger impact on the country. But I remember just watching it at home, and by that time I was jaded enough where literally I wasn't fooled for literally 5 seconds from the ridiculous official story, because they started talking about Osama bin Laden right away, which they had no reason to do. And they just, the game was given away. And of course, again, Dick Cheney was at the heart of that. And Donald Rumsfeld the day before said there's, $2 trillion missing from the Pentagon. They still haven't found that, which is an odd thing. So there's so many questions about that day. But again, it was not much as the JFK assassination and these other things. These even recently the Trump assassination attempt, which wasn't even mentioned, as you noted. But these things are never investigated. They're kind of brushed aside, and they come up with an official narrative that is always ridiculous. In this case, we're told that 19 crazed Arabs, led by the tallest Arab in the world, apparently, Osama bin Laden, from the Bat Cave and some kind of Bat Cave in Afghanistan, orchestrated this. And they had planes flying around American airspace, including heading for the heart of the biggest defense establishment the world has ever seen. And no actions were taken. If anything was done by the government, they shot down Flight 93 in Pennsylvania and lied about it. That's the only thing they may have done. And as I pointed out, just a few months before that, golfer Payne Stewart, who was a very famous golfer, U.S. Open champion at the time, he had a tragic experience in his plane where all the oxygen was sucked out or something, and they all died. Everybody on board the plane died instantly. And so the plane was on autopilot. Our government sent up fighter jets within 15 minutes to make sure it didn't crash somewhere. There were no fighter jets sent up anywhere when this plane was headed for the Pentagon. This is, so at the very least, we get it. Obviously, we don't think it was 19 crazed Arabs. And in fact, in this book, we point out that what's been forgotten is that Muhammad Atta, who was, probably the most famous alleged hijacker, his father talked to a German television station or magazine, German media, it wasn't going to happen here, and talked about how his son called him the day after 9/11 and said that he was being framed by the Mossad or something for it, and was living in terror for, I think he said the U.S. Secret Services or something, they were going to kill. Did you hear anybody talk about that? No, of course not. That's the kind of things I can put in my books because people don't know. And obviously that should have been investigated. Wait a minute, how is the main hijacker? Obviously he's dead right now. And in fact, we know that other hijackers the government has admitted were alive afterwards. Now, we look at what happened that day. In this book, I published much of the testimony of over 150 firefighters alone that reported very clearly explosions in the Twin Towers. There's no question about it. Over 150 firefighters alone. And yet the 9/11 Commission report, just like the Warren Commission of JFK, would lie and say there was no evidence of explosions in the buildings. Well, how are you going to trust a government that lies like that? You were talking about Kamala Harris or anybody else lying. This is just what you see with the government, the standing operating procedure. I mean, same thing. For instance, in my book Hidden History, I had interviewed a guy named Scott Forbes who worked in the Twin Towers. He wasn't there. His whole group was off that day, fortunately, but he had moved to England in fear. And he talked to me, and you could feel the fear in his voice. But he said, "Yeah, we all saw strange things in the few weeks leading up to the 9/11." Where we saw these workmen coming in and doing odd things, like the security cameras are disabled, and we didn't know what was going on. And after it happened, they had been there for years and never seen anything like it. After it happened, they naturally reported the authorities because they thought, again, naively, they thought the authorities wanted to get to the truth. The authorities didn't. The NYPD had no interest in it. The FBI didn't. And later, the 9/11 Commission report had no interest. And in fact, the 9/11 Commission report again lied and said there was no evidence. There were rumors about mysterious power outages and all the stuff that he talked about. And again, this is the guy that worked there. So he contradicts. So it's to me, it's kind of like when you talked about those Haitians in the neighborhood where the city manager says that, no, but you have the people that are there experiencing it on the ground saying, what motive do they have to lie? Same thing here. This guy had no motive to lie. And there are tons of stories like that. And this book goes into more detail, I think, than anybody ever has. And we talk about, for instance, people have heard of Building 7, well, which of course collapsed today and wasn't hit by a plane or anything. They can't explain that. It was obviously imploded. But few people have heard of Building 6. I talk about Building 6 in depth in this book. Building 6 was where they kept a large cache of gold, and the gold disappeared. And the guy that talked about it, Kurt Sonnenfeld, who blew the whistle on it, his wife ended up being murdered, and they tried to frame him for the murder. He fled to Argentina, where he still is. So there's tons of these kind of facts out there that with a free press, they could have been unearthed, and the conspiracy or whatever really happened, the inside job, as Alex Jones used to call it, whatever you want to call it, could have been exposed a long time ago. But however you look at it, people say, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I have no theory. What's my theory? I'm just putting these are all sourced. Everything I write is sourced, it's footnoted, and I try to use mainstream sources as possible because people inexplicably trust them more. But my point is that, you're being lied to. So whatever happened, I don't know, people say this and that, whoever did 9/11. I just know it wasn't 19 crazed Arabs armed with box cutters and plastic knives. That didn't happen. What they told you didn't happen. Same thing with JFK assassination. Who killed JFK? Well, they proved it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. So let's do a real investigation and see. So that's all I do is I try to expose the incredible lies of the official narratives. And certainly 9/11, for instance, JFK assassination, they've been very little truth allowed ever on television, network television about it. But you had Mark Lane and others that would appear here and there as part of groups. But 9/11, to my knowledge, there has not been one special on any TV network that even hinted at 9/11 truth. So this is probably the biggest cover up of our lifetimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And there, either way, there were so many real victims of that day, victims afterwards, that because of lies after the fact about the contaminants at the site, there was many first responders that came down with cancers, if I recall correctly. And then also the victims of all of America, because we had a lot of fundamental rights taken away with the Patriot Act that was able to be ushered in. So, I mean, the ramifications of 9/11 are deep and wide and deserve more time to investigate and expose. And I'm really intrigued by your book. Again, that book is American Memory Hole, because you're mentioning things I have not heard about before. Because, I've heard about nearly 4,000 architects saying this could never happen. This is ridiculous. I think many of us have heard that. Many of us have heard the ridiculous story of passports being found on the ground. So everything blew up. The tallest buildings in the world blew up extremely, but the passports or IDs, they were fine somehow and able to be found in the rubble. I mean, there's things that are just so blatantly absurd that you can't help but look into. But I do want to further ask you about what you think that these different administrations will do. You know, Trump has made some promises of exposure about different things, but want to ask you about that. But I think we should take a quick break as a natural stopping point to simmer on some of the things you told us. So we're going to take a quick break, hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back with our guest. Really giving 9/11 the time that it deserves, the truth about 9/11 the time it deserves, when we return.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0. When I invented My Pillow, it had everything you'd ever want in a pillow. Well, now there's new technology that makes it even better. My Pillow 2.0 has my patented fill combined with a cooling fabric with temperature regulating thread. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
Now's the time to go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use the promo code to save 50% on your MyPillow 2.0. Not only that, for a limited time, your entire order ships absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
MyPillow.com.
Make sure you support our sponsors like MyPillow, because that's what makes this show possible to get out to you. As our guest has said, Donald Jeffries, author of American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. The mainstream, well, it's no longer mainstream, but the legacy media, the regime media, they are not interested in this. Here we are on another anniversary of 9/11 with more questions than answers. Fortunately, Donald Jeffries digs into that in his book. We were talking about before the break, some things that I had never even heard before, different angles on this, because I think you hear a lot of the same angles, which are course fascinating, but you dug a little bit deeper. We're able to talk to some people that worked there and hear about some things that were happening in advance. That's intriguing, as well as the extended interviews with 150 firefighters who heard the explosions. We never hear from them, and things like this. But I want to cut to the chase about exposure, because that's what you're passionate about. And that's why you, as a former leftist Democrat, I imagine maybe went independent, is because you were frustrated with the fact that we can't even talk about these things. You were curious. Well, they are not curious about these things. But I want to hear your honest answer about, Trump has made a lot of promises that if I get into office this time, I will release all the truth about JFK. Obviously, you spent a lot of extensive investigation on that. He's also said he would likely release the entire Epstein client list. And I guess who knows what he would do regarding 9/11. I don't know that he's addressed that, but what confidence do you have that he would follow through with major exposure?
Well, from his first 4 years, obviously, he didn't follow through on so many things. And, Roger Stone had, before I knew who Roger Stone was, before he really broke and he started appearing on Alex Jones all the time, he was one of the first notable people to like my book, Hidden History, back in 2014. And he contacted me. We had a couple phone conversations, and he started talking about Donald Trump and said, "You're going to love this guy. He's running for president, and he knows about all the conspiracies." And I thought, well, I don't know, maybe this is possible. And Trump has always hinted at these things, the things I write. He constantly hints about it, but then he backtracks. And in terms of 9/11, there's tape of him on the day of 9/11 talking about there had to be explosions. And people thought, so I think he knows these things. I don't know why he always pulls back. It would be nice to think that he'll do something different this time. And certainly Bobby Kennedy being involved with him, and him, getting on stage and saying that he's promising to establish a commission to investigate presidential assassinations, which is something, as leftist back in the day, that would have been, magic to my ears. Like, wow, I never thought I'd hear anybody say that. Now, will he do it? Will he get a chance to, too? And we have no idea how the election is going to turn out. They haven't addressed the fraud from the last election. In fact, they're prosecuting him and some of his aides for suggesting there was fraud. So I don't know. I have no idea how legitimate the election may be. I don't have much confidence in it, but certainly I would love. I'm a Trump agnostic. I say we're part of the smallest minority group in the world. And so, but I get mistaken for a Trump supporter. I did vote for Trump. I get mistaken for a Trump supporter constantly because I'm so critical of the people on the left. And I don't understand. I understand people that don't like Harris or Trump. I don't understand people that could like Harris under any circumstances. I don't get that at all. But so that's kind of a long answer to your question. But I don't know. We would have to wait and see. But I think if he did backtrack and he did flip flop and he didn't do what he said he did, I think he would be under a lot more pressure from his base because we hear a lot. Well, he was under constant attack the first 4, and he was, and so that's why and everything. So, well, this time, hopefully, it would be different, but we'd have to wait and see. I hope we get the chance to see because again, I'm a Trump agnostic, but there's no question at this point that whatever he is preferable to the other side is absolute insanity at this point. I don't want to have to deal with that.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And as an independent, I was very proud of being an independent because I spent so many years in traditional journalism, and I was like, I got to be an independent. But the minute I went independent in journalism, I was accused of being MAGA instantly, without even really having formed a true opinion. And the thing is in my quest to hold those in power accountable and seeing the mass corruption, it did push me more to the right because that's the only people that are even allowed to talk, are even allowed to have debate or discussion. And I felt like if my duty and my mission is to bring balance to the news, then I actually have to elevate these issues and elevate his voice and elevate these things because obviously traditional media is elevating the other side. So it brings about balance if I elevate, and which I think is the ultimate goal is we want overall all balance. But again, tangent. Another one thing that does encourage, and that's another reason I'm just going to say that it's always welcome. People are always welcome to criticize Trump on this show, even though obviously this is on Patriot TV and it's a conservative network. But people are on this show. People are allowed to speak. A free speech absolutist. I've had Alan Dershowitz on the show. He even as critical as he has been of the Biden administration, he had said at one point that he was going to continue to vote for him, which I don't understand. But yeah, anyone's allowed to share how they feel. I am encouraged though because of the degree of attacks on Trump that they are afraid that he would bring about mass exposure. That's clear. I mean, he was nearly killed. So the huge red flag for me. Wanted to ask you about that many proceed to the lies of the media and the pandemic. Through the pandemic, people really got to see in real time the mass propaganda campaigns. It really has gotten, I think, more of the public to question everything. In your experience, do you feel like there's a lot more people interested in taking another look at the JFK assassination, taking another look at 9/11 after they've seen these things?
Sure. Well, sure. And as you can see, my books are always strategically placed behind the bookshelf. You can see Masking the Truth over there. That's my book I wrote about COVID, how COVID-19 destroyed civil liberties and shut down the world. Sherry Tenpenny wrote the foreword. That is, I call it the most shadow banned book in the world. I could tell you stories on what they've done to that. Amazon disappeared the Kindle version. Barnes & Noble disappeared the entire thing without explanation. Apple Books priced it at $999. Libraries boycotted it. Nobody wants to hear the truth about that. So I think COVID opened the eyes of a lot of people because we all experienced it. And it was, I call it the greatest psyop in the history of the world. I mean, the entire world was shut down without a single shot being fired. I mean, they didn't need any military, they needed police. Everybody abided, and there were no laws passed. People think mandates are not laws. They're akin to what you would see in royal days, in the Middle Ages, where some court jester would come out and blow his trumpet and say, "Hear ye, hear ye! This is a new decree from the king." That's basically what these mandates were. You shall stand 6 feet apart, and you have to wear your mask everywhere. And everybody, so many people rolled over and abided. That it disillusioned me terribly. But I think, especially when you hear them talking about monkeypox or these other bird flu or these other, like they may try it again. I don't think they'll be as successful this time. I think there'll be more people that are unwilling to put up with it because a lot of people, didn't get to say goodbye to their loved ones in nursing homes and so forth. They didn't They didn't get to get that last hug with somebody because they were abiding these stupid mandates. So I think, yeah, I think all these things are tied together. I mean, I have young people that weren't born, obviously, at the time of the JFK assassination that are interested in it, and they like to hear me talk about it because it matters. And I think in terms of, this the American Memory Hole goes back to the beginning of the Republic. And I talk about Thomas Jefferson, who's still one of my great heroes. But, the JFK assassination is where, in terms of, because it's like the boomers in 9/11, that's, I think, where in the modern age where people first started seeing, the term conspiracy theory didn't become popular until after the JFK assassination. In fact, the CIA addressed it and pretty much popularized the term conspiracy theory in a famous memo in 1967, which is a directive against the critics of the Warren Report, people like my mentor, Mark Lane, where they basically, and if you read that memo, and it's available online, if you read it, you can see such familiar rhetoric that they've used in all these other cases in terms they talked about using assets in the media, talk about how, someone would have talked and how the same kind of stuff I hear all the time. People say, oh, nobody can keep a secret in Washington, D.C. And I point out, well, many people have talked. Some of them, or too many of them, ended up dead. I mean, look at how we treat even the most famous whistleblowers, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Bradley Manning, and people like that. It happens all the time. Look at the guy, United Airlines, the Boeing guy, who the whistleblower wound up dead. And then another one, I think, did too. So, these things are happening and they're so obvious, and yet no matter what happens, and that's what I think, Christy, what we're dealing with is that we have such a divided country. And whatever you think of Trump, the 70 to 80 million people that I think still support him to some degree or did support him, those are the people that we're reaching. Those are the people that are awake, at least to some degree. They know, they can at least see the corruption of the awful Democrats, today's Democrats, and how bad they are, and the crazy transgender madness and the cultural nonsense, especially. And as you mentioned, free speech, and I'm a free speech purist myself. Like I said, I think I'm the last civil libertarian in America where, and free speech it's terrible, the war on free speech. And I just wrote an article about it for American Free Press, and the New York Times alone in the last 30 days editorialized twice against free, basically said with the same theme that the First Amendment has gone too far. It's time to reassess. And you get that both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have publicly said that the First Amendment goes too far. And this is where we're at. And when a presidential candidate can say that kind of thing openly and it doesn't lose some support. And what's saddest of all is what, as I suspected, a recent public opinion poll showed that 53% of the American people think the First Amendment's gone too far. And I think that's probably accurate. And that's the saddest thing of all. When I look out, and certainly COVID proved that we're outnumbered. It's close, but we're outnumbered. Of course, with every new wave of immigrants and migrants that come in, they're not going to be on our side. And that's why it's another reason why we have to, and Trump does talk about mass deportations. It has to be done. I mean, there's no other way about it, because this country has been transformed. You talk about, people talk about the Reagan landslide and everything in 1985. That obviously that was a completely different America. The America you have today, people, especially Republicans, I think they naively fail to understand the demographic changes and what that means in terms of voting patterns. So I don't know. I guess I was all over the place there. I'm not even sure what your question was. That's kind of what I do. I tend to wander all over and address different subjects.
Well, that's what happens to people like us that do have a natural curiosity and are wanting to question and hit on everything. So I fully understand that. But again, we're here on the 9/11 anniversary, and I hate to use that word anniversary because it's not like something we should be celebrating. Side note, it's actually my parents' 54th wedding anniversary today. I never forget their wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
You poor people, you have the anniversary.
Oh, that's yeah.
But yeah, I mean, here we are again, more than 20 years later. And, I think we've already discussed that people are more curious, more open to these things. What would you, besides reading your book, of course, what would you say to people who are like, okay, I'm willing to look, like where did they begin?
Well, in terms of anything, 9/11, I mean, my book, Hidden History, which is the original, that's a good primer on things that have happened since JFK assassination up to the Obama years. I wrote it before Trump actually entered politics. This book, American Memory Hole, kind of addresses that again in more depth, and also the stuff that was in Crimes and Cover-ups in American Politics, 1776, 1963, which is kind of the prequel to Hidden History. And so this is pretty much the third volume. I think if you begin, what subject intrigues you the most? You could even, something as recent as the Trump assassination attempt, which is, and I started writing about it after like a couple of weeks, and I kept saying, this has already been forgotten. Nobody's talking about it. And including Trump. I mean, he did mention once in the debate about, I probably took a shot in the air or something, but the fact that, and that was very significant that you mentioned no questions were asked about it. And again, if this was just an unbiased thing, they would have confronted Kamala Harris with that. Do you feel the rhetoric of the left had anything to do with somebody shooting at him? And how did you feel about that? But they don't do that because, again, they're not even attempting to be unbiased. So I would say look at something like that. There's a lot to look there. The Secret Service completely stood down. You had a guy walking around with a rifle and climbing up the side of the building, and they couldn't, and witnesses couldn't. They kept pointing it out to law enforcement, and still they did nothing. And you can see the video, they stood down. They didn't follow protocol. They should have covered him and wished him off the stage. They shouldn't have allowed him to jump up and pump his fist and all that to expose himself to further shots. So whatever happened should be investigated, but it won't be. I feel confident that it will, because none of these things ever are. And that's why you can go back to whatever thing you prefer. 9/11 certainly is a big one. And as you mentioned, so much changed after 9/11. I call the America where people that can check out my Substack, where that's the only place I'm not being shadow banned. But I talk a lot about America 2.0. I think we're living in a different country, and I think America 2.0 was pretty much born after 9/11. I think that created it, and I think that's where you got free speech zones, and you got the Patriot Act, and you got Homeland Security, which no one, how did we get along without Homeland Security for 200 years? More than 200 years, but somehow now it's entrenched. No one talks about it. And what happens is there was an easy segue from saying the terrorists. And by the way, one thing COVID did kill is that it killed terrorism, because you notice very few people until the Hamas attack in Israel, no one had been talking about terror. Certainly during the entire COVID thing, the terrorists apparently took a break because no one. So that's why people like me, I'm cynical, and I think these are boogeymen. H.L. Mencken called them foreign hobgoblins back in the day, a great classical liberal writer. And I think we're being subjected to this. Certainly COVID was the ultimate in fear porn. But if you could just get anybody in the media to look at any of these cases, for instance, JFK Jr., and I was the first one really to expose the fact that was another Kennedy assassination. They definitely killed him. And I talked about that in Hidden History. And in this book, American Memory Hole, I go deeper. I contacted a few of the people that were central to that. And again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but people I think will be surprised at what their response was. But, I don't think he's alive. I'm sorry, Q people, but he was definitely assassinated. But any of these things, I look at it like, it's like the domino effect that they used to talk about in terms of communism. If you just knock over one of these dominoes, doesn't matter what it is, a Trump assassination attempt, then it starts going backwards to Seth Rich and all these other things that are part of what Hunter Biden's laptop and what was really on there, those kinds of things. The Ukraine. If you go the other direction, the JFK assassination, well, that goes forward the other direction to MLK and RFK. Clinton, the crimes of the Clintons. You had Oklahoma City, Waco, Ruby Ridge, Vince Foster, all those things, and JFK Jr. They're all connected. So these are all, that's why people tell me, you think everything is a conspiracy. Well, yeah, I do, because I think we're being run by conspirators. So I think this is standard operating procedure for them. This is the way they do business. They don't know any other way. They conspire against the public. So all these things I think are important. I think you start where you want, and as somebody who was a Kennedy fanboy and kind of still is a Kennedy fanboy, I started with the JFK assassination, and I'm still drawn to that. Bobby Kennedy Jr., even though I had a lot of problems with his campaign, and we have 3 degrees of separation. He knows who I am. We have many mutual friends in common, but I'm still drawn to that because he was running for president, and I never thought I'd see a presidential candidate saying that the government killed JFK and RFK. I mean, that was part of his. He was saying it over and over again. I thought, wow, this is a Kennedy saying. And you can see what happened there, how sad it is, the family dysfunction, where almost all his siblings came out. It was shameful. And, okay, that's fine if you don't agree with him, but why are you openly rooting for the other person? Even his daughter came out with some ridiculous story about how he cut the head off a whale to make him look like an idiot and put it on and they were wearing plastic. The whole story was ridiculous. And I can't imagine, as a parent, I can't imagine how it feels to be betrayed by your own child. So I have great respect for him, even just. But again, I'm a Kennedy fanboy, so I just suggest people look wherever there's interest. And that's what the thing about my history books that I've been told, they're like encyclopedias, kind of politically incorrect encyclopedias, where you don't have to start at the beginning, although they are, historically there's a timeline, but you can start wherever you want. Go to this section and then go back, and people seem to like that.
Yeah. I mean, it is disgusting. Like, it literally made my stomach turn, some of how they turned against him. But it is also enlightening how how it exposes just the vitriol and the division, to the point that a huge leftist like Bill Maher did a whole segment on how disgusting it was how they were attacking Cheryl, his wife, for being married to him. I mean, it's just demented. I mean, it's so demented at this point. And of course, the media ignores the fact that most of Tim Walz's family is supporting Trump.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
and the media is exposed for blowing this up, blowing up Mary Trump, who Donald Trump Jr. was like, what, we saw her for like 20 minutes in the last 25 years, yet the media always talks to Mary Trump as the Trump ambassador. And then they completely ignore this other controversy with Tim Walz, the worst VP pick, in my opinion, ever, about most of his family supporting Trump. They ignore that and elevate all this stuff. It's just constant exposure. But yeah, I mean, it also exposed to them that here we have a Kennedy as a candidate again, and who lost his uncle and his father to assassinations. And you had a administration that is so corrupt that they denied him Secret Service protection for months and months and months, finally gave it to him after Trump's assassination, but then ripped it right back the minute that he did not say he was dropping out. But at that point, he said he was suspending his campaign. He was still running, and they ripped it right away again. Just sick. They truly want their opponents dead. It's so disgusting. But Donald, your book is American Memory Hole. So intrigued by the other things that you've uncovered and all of these things. And I couldn't help but when you were talking, think of all those detective shows with the red string tying everything together, because it truly is like that. You end up seeing the same characters, the same themes. They always use fear to take our freedoms away through all of these different things. So thank you for your dedication to tying those things together and enlightening people who are seeking after the truth. Any final words that you can share about 9/11 or your book, or any other final thoughts?
Yeah, well, there's so many interesting things. And 9/11, you mentioned things you hadn't heard of. I'm sure you probably haven't heard of this either. We go into detail. And again, I want to thank my research team, Chris Graves and Peter Seacott. They really helped me out a lot. I couldn't write these books without them now, because the internet has made it harder. Search engines are censored and everything. You need people that know what they're doing. But on 9/11, there was unbelievable, inordinate amount of people that canceled their flights, those flights that ended up crashing at the last minute, and including just an unbelievable number of celebrities. And I go into the book about, I just don't think that has happened before. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe celebrities cancel flights at the last minute all the time. I don't know, especially because Boston was involved. That many celebrities flying out of Boston, I don't know. I found it very curious. And people can see in there's, everybody from Seth MacFarlane and Mark Wahlberg to Chef Julia Child and a couple athletes and so forth. It's those are the kind of things that I question, and especially when you look at the fact that the flights were really, they were like 1/4 full, 1/3 full, very strange. For that day. And so again, I don't think people who question that, but there's lots more in there. And then again, people can find it. And I would ask people, they want to follow my writing all the time, to go to Substack, DonaldJeffries.substack.com. It's called I Protest, because I'm always protesting something. And that is That's the way to find me, because everywhere else, I mean, X has lightened up a little bit. My shadow ban was really bad. There, people were constantly telling me, "Hey, I keep getting unfollowed when I follow you," but Elon Musk has lightened it up a little bit, and so people can follow me at Don Jeffries there. Facebook is hopeless, and YouTube is hopeless too. I mean, I have a podcast. I still have a channel, but I mean, they got me. It was a couple weeks ago. They suspended my account again for hate speech for an interview I did about 9/11 like 8 years ago with Richard Gage, the former director of Architects and Engineers, and hate speech. So this is where we are now. So we have to fight, and we have to stick together. And I hope people can get over their minor differences. So, like I said, somebody like Trump, I've had a lot of problems with it, but if he establishes a commission on the assassinations, that'd be great. And if he does anything about immigration, that's why I voted for him in 2016. Said if he can finally do something about it, that with this problems a lot faster, then I don't care what else he does. I don't care, but there's some things I don't like about him. But if he does that, and I think we have to look. We can't expect anybody to be perfect. The same thing with when we're making political bedfellows. We're going to have disagreements with people, and that's fine. But we have to try to improve things as we can, because one thing that Trump is talking about, this country is falling, and I call it the world's wealthiest banana republic already. And when you have things like Haitians entering neighborhoods, whether or not they're eating cats and dogs, they're there, and they're obviously not embracing the culture, and the government is telling them not to embrace it. So we have to try to address that, and let's hope we can do something about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to be following you, Donald Jeffries. Make sure I can get past the shadow banning to find you, and would love to have you back sometime. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, anytime, Chrissy. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. And because I enjoyed our conversation too much, we got to go ahead and wrap the show. Want to remind you, go to patriot.tv/counter narrative, patriot.tv/counter narrative, become a member to support the show, support our sponsors, shop at the Patriot TV store, if you will. And also want to, of course, share with you my verse of the day. It's a quick one, Psalm 138:3. On the day I called, you answered me. You made me bold with strength in my soul. So don't get disheartened. Keep on pressing on. He does listen when we call to him, and he makes us bold with strength. So keep that up. Please continue to share Counter Narrative with friends and family. Make sure that they're getting all of the sides of the viewpoints. And I really thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time.
Now I'm on the right side